FBI raids in Minneapolis on September 24th raised some serious legal issues on personal privacy and the right to dissent. Here are the comments of 3 lawyers attending this rally.
In this July, the Supreme Court interpreted to say it might just make President Carter a felon for providing election aid in Lebanon. Because you can't go to Lebanon and teach people how to have elections unless you work with Hezbollah, which is one of the major political parties in Lebanon.
The 4 or 5 major legal and policy decisions after 9/11 that have led us to this kind of very sorry state. And I don't even know if you know, there's a new breaking news report about the IG having found just today that there's cheating in the FBI. This is a brand new one. This is not, like 6 days ago they had one about opening surveillances of peace groups. Okay, today, breaking news, they have found, IG, Inspector General, that agents are cheating on the test that they were supposed to take, and the test subject matter was surveillances of domestic groups, and they found, yeah, cheating. They were copying the answers. I think the public only knows the tip of the iceberg, and it's very similar to the church committee. When you finally get an oversight, people feel comfortable at talking. You got, back in '76, you got the number 3 guy in the FBI, O'Sullivan, and he walked in and he talked about COINTELPRO, and he's practically crying when he discloses what they did. And his big statement was, you know, when we sat around a table dreaming this up, no one asked, is it legal, is it ethical, is it moral? That was his big statement, disclosing. And I think we need, you know, after Abu Ghraib and after all of these, and actually the FBI, of all of the intelligence agencies, was a cut above. They did not engage in the worst abuses. But this massive data collection that's taking place that the Washington Post disclosed, Top Secret America, everyone should read that article, the 3-part series, and know what's going on, and then contact the IG, Inspector General.
Does this look like a fishing expedition to you, what was done with these activists?
It's without seeing the affidavit, because the affidavit is the part that contains, if there is factual justification, it will be in the affidavit. No one has seen it. Now there's some indications that the wording was brought, so they were seizing all documents and things like that. So there's some clues that it could be a fishing expedition, but I mean, we don't know that necessarily. I'm drawing on what I know of the IG's investigations of the FBI targeting the Thomas Merton Center, the RNC protesters in Iowa City. You know, here locally, in the lead up to the RNC, all of the groups, the Women Against Military Madness, for instance, 25-year-long established peace group, is on a chart, and it's on a link analysis that the Department of Homeland Security prepared in the summer of 2008, connecting everybody guilt by association. And it's, you look at it, there's nothing there. It's just fabricated out of whole cloth. You know what? That's defamatory. You know, if you think about a young student, if you're a college student, would you join a group that is listed on a Highway Watch, Homeland Security? This is absolutely wrong. And it harkens back to, you know, the 1950s and the 1960s. And I want to ask if an official will actually do the right thing and take it on. And I'm not making any pronouncements right or wrong, but ask for an inquiry. And Glenn Fine, the Inspector General, has done a fair job so far. He has exposed abuses on the part of the national FBI's seeking of national security letters twice. He had, of course, his first investigation of 2002 to 2006. He had the post 9/11 roundup. That was a thing he exposed. We need to ask for the church committee type congressional investigation where they have the proper resources.
I'm a member of the National Lawyers Guild here in Minnesota, past president of the National Lawyers Guild. I thank Deb for her kind words, but it's really been an organizational effort of the National Lawyers Guild since 1936 to defend the right of people to dissent. We were at our national conference in New Orleans on Friday morning when we received the first phone calls at 7:21 a.m. about the raids in Chicago and Minneapolis and the approach to activists in other places around the country. And, you know, the day before, we've been holding a seminar on the law, the material support law, which is the basis for this investigation and prosecution. And we spent an entire afternoon talking about it on Thursday, only to wake up on Friday and see it being applied in a new and frightening way. Because what we're seeing today, in the past, this is a law that has been used against people that in many cases can comfortably be painted as the other in some way or another. Whether it's Palestinian Americans, whether it's people that can be painted as extreme in their political views. But what we woke up to on Friday morning was seeing the extension of that law to people who are grounded in the political movements that we're a part of, in the anti-poverty movement, in the anti-war movement, in the solidarity movement, in a movement for justice against racism, for gay and lesbian rights, for the rights of women, for equality, for peace, for freedom. And that means that all of us can be targets. These laws started in 1996 under a Democratic administration. They're being enforced now under a Democratic administration. We can talk about the Patriot Law passed in the aftermath of the attacks of 9/11 by a Republican administration, but extended and enforced and carried out by a Democratic administration and a Democratic Congress. This is about a series of laws that give increasing power, not subject to review, to the President and to the national security establishment. Let's be objective about what happened on Friday, whether you support it or not. The internal security forces of the United States, increasingly integrated on a local, state, and national level, carried out a raid using law enforcement internal security agents from the local and national internal security agencies against dissidents who oppose government policy. That's an objective, accurate description of what happened, even if you support those raids. They're using laws that were passed that in this July the Supreme Court interpreted to say it might just make President Carter a felon for providing election aid in Lebanon. Because you can't go to Lebanon and teach people how to have elections unless you work with Hezbollah, which is one of the major political parties in Lebanon. And the Supreme Court said this July that having meetings and talking to these prohibited foreign organizations is a crime, even if you're just teaching them on how to go to the United Nations and file a legal petition, or you're teaching them how to resolve conflict. Now, many of you may have been part of the anti-apartheid movement in the 1980s. A movement when the African National Congress was declared a terrorist organization by the Reagan administration. Had these laws been in effect then, the entire anti-apartheid movement would have been guilty of providing material support to terrorism. Or you may have been involved in the committee in solidarity with the people of El Salvador, working and talking and dialoguing with the FMLN, a party which now leads the government in El Salvador. Or you may have listened to the election when President Obama said, we have to talk to our enemies in order to negotiate peace. What the material support for terrorism law says is you can't talk to your enemies. It's not material support that matters. It's not providing money or financial aid. That you're talking to people. Now the Supreme Court says, well, you can talk about anything you want, but you can't do it in a coordinated fashion. Now at the same time, they say the determination of what's coordinated is very fact-intensive. Meaning we're not going to set any bright lines that protect people who might go and talk to someone that the government, in its unreviewable executive authority, has designated as someone you can't talk to. So if you talk to someone, coordinated or not, you run the risk of prosecution because it's a fact-based inquiry, meaning that the talking is probable cause, enough to open an investigation, enough to get a search warrant, enough to raid a home, enough to issue a subpoena to people, to make them go in front of a grand jury and answer questions. Who do you know? Who do you talk to? What do you think? And if you don't answer them, you can sit in jail for 4, 6, 8, 18 months until the grand jury term ends. This will be a long struggle. We'll have to stand by our friends. I have to say I was so moved by everything, but by particularly my sister Jess Sundine's words to start out. Her history, her dedication. I mean, it personalizes this to remember who we're talking about. And so, I mean, this is a very personal struggle. It's a very legal one, too. It's going to be a long one. It's going to be a difficult one. I stand with the people under subpoena and under attack. I hope you all do, too.
It's hard to predict how many more people are going to be subpoenaed before the grand jury, but apparently they have a fairly broad investigation going on in several different cities. And so what will happen is people will be called before the grand jury and ask questions, and if they decline to answer, then they may be given immunity, and then ask more questions. If they refuse to answer, they'll have to decide whether they're willing to risk contempt of court, which will mean being jailed if they refuse to answer for the length of the grand jury, which would be up to 18 months. And then they could be called before another grand jury in the future. And that's been the tactic that's been used historically.
You have no way of knowing if there's going to be more?
No, there's really no way to know. And however, I think what we can say with some certainty is that the situation we have in Minnesota is that this has been the largest and most expensive anti-terrorism investigation in history, and they've come up with virtually nothing. And with the size and expense of the bureaucracy that was set up here, I suspect that there may be people wondering why it's continuing. And if I were in that position, I guess I'd want to find something to continue to investigate, and I think this has met a need.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail.
Right.